you hear me?
Yep. Fine.
So nice to be back here. Nice to catch up with my ex-colleagues and my talkie. So congratulations! Today is the first day of our almost normal.
Yay!
No check-ins. No. I used to get confused over the rules. Now I'm confused when I take off and when I put on your mask, right? When do you do indoor and outdoor? So I want to introduce. Thanks for coming. I want to introduce my. Kenneth tells me I'm supposed to introduce, our panel of esteemed experts. So maybe first, let me start with ladies. Shall we have Sharon from STACS join us? Sharon is the Chief Commercial Officer of STACS. Yes. And then could we have the two gentlemen, Bidyut, Head of Innovation for DBS. During the networking, I encourage everybody to sort of study. We were just talking about it in the room. Bidyut's infamous or famous profile on LinkedIn, the way he does his profile and his mugshots. And last but not least, we have Quentin from Wavemaker, in fact, one of the founding. So, thank you for taking time. So this session is also recorded so that people who can't join us will be able to watch it on YouTube on demand later and not miss what we have to discuss today. So we're here to talk about what's green and sustainable. That's what the SFA team tells me, right? So I think this event is organized by Simple FinTech Club as well as the Green and Sustainable Subcommittee of SFA. I think it's quite cool that we have this subcom and this chapter in SFA to sort of have a group of people from different sectors of fintech look at this horizontally across the sector. So what's green and sustainable? Two of the most trending and probably hashtag, words, especially in the last few years. So today we have with our panelists, we hope to sort of look at what has been going on. A lot has happened. It has not only gone mainstream, some of the changes that we're seeing, the global events. I think what we want to discuss today, as we met yesterday to sort of catch up, what should we talk about? We also receive questions and feedback from the community. And sorry if I have to refer to this, I don't have a fantastic memory. So the things that we hear the community wants are curious about, I want to talk about. I see buzzwords like blockchain, carbon credits, carbon tax, renewable energy, data, greenwashing. Greenwashing came up a lot. I've got people who ping me on LinkedIn and had questions on greenwashing. So I think when we talked about okay, so what should we focus on? Yesterday when we met, we thought okay, based on their respective experience, what they've been doing to push the ESG agenda in their respective space, let's try to discuss the developments in the recent years on carbon credits, carbon tax, what's been happening around the world, the war, the pandemic, which is the questions that we receive as well. How has this shaped the ESG agenda, and how, I'm sure as businesses and individuals, we are curious, what are the changes that that we see coming in the horizon. So hopefully we can sort of put it together in a coherent picture. And I just want to start off by having that introduction I think really didn't do them justice. I want to have them introduce themselves to you, what they do, and sort of if you can share with us what you're doing, not only your role in your company, but sort of what's relevant in terms of the ESG space, and sort of from me, your personal passion, what keeps you going on pushing this agenda in your company. Maybe I'll start with Sharon.
Hi, thank you, ShuFen. And firstly, I want to thank the Singapore FinTech Association as well for inviting me to speak today, and also the team for organizing and putting this event together. So my name is Sharon. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at STACS. And so STACS is actually an official partner of MAS Project Blueprint. And as you're aware, MAS announced during the last Singapore FinTech Festival that they're building 4 common utility platform to kind of enable a more transparent and trusted ESG ecosystem to enable green and sustainable finance. So one of the platform, common utility platform is actually the ESG registry, and that is what STACS is building with MAS. And so over the last year or so, last few months, what we have worked on is developing a blockchain-based ESG platform. We have actually named this platform ESGpedia. So in its simplest form, it's actually a Wikipedia or encyclopedia of all ESG data. And we are ingesting on this, think of this ESG registration. ESG registry has ingesting categories, 3 categories. The firstly is the self-disclosed data. We have done integration to CDP, which is the Carbon Disclosure Project. So as you know, CDP is a global not-for-profit, and they are one of the largest environmental database. And so we have done integration to CDP. We have also done integration to Low Carbon SG, which is based in Singapore, and we also plan to integrate to the Greenprint Common Disclosure Platform by SGX as well. So we have the first category of common self-disclosure data. We are also integrating to some ongoing project data. So we will be integrating to platforms like the sectorial data platform. Just for some example, Savannah Jurong or Evercom, where we'll be ingesting ongoing data in the building management side. So you'll be able to ingest data like carbon emission of certain buildings, fleet management, etc., carbon emission from the fleet, and lastly the certification bodies. So we are also digitizing certificates and ingesting all this data into ESGpedia. So what we are trying to the output, what we're trying to do is actually to provide financial institutions and corporates with access to all this data so that they are so it will help them in their green financing, their portfolio monitoring, and also tracking of their performance. And we hope that what we are doing is meaningful. I mean, I find what we're doing is quite meaningful to in terms of building a more resilient and sustainable future. I feel that's my contribution, and that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, thank you. So the work is around data. We're sort of fixing the taxonomy and the issues that we have around data and disclosure. So are these platforms live already?
Yes, we already have a demo version, and we are launching it next month. In fact, Grace here marketing will be doing some announcement later. We will be having an industry showcase together with Singapore Fintech Association and MAS. And at that showcase, we'll be doing our main launch of ESGpedia.
Oh, that's exciting. Thank you for that. Thank you, Sharon. So maybe Bidyut, we have you, speak next. You want to tell us about your profile picture? How's that going?
Life is about perspective. So I'll give you my perspective on what I do, then I'll give you other people's perspective on what they think I do. So my perspective is that I've got a two-pronged strategy in the bank. So I look after innovation at DBS. And one is, the intent is to nurture creative energy. So all about creating innovators, the culture of innovation, the entire intent to make a change and deliver value, etc. The other aspect is orchestrating that creative energy into something tangible. So you harness the creative energy and you come up with innovations. So innovators and innovations are the two-pronged strategy. So that's my perspective. How other people probably describe me as troublemaker, shit stirrer, fighter, and everything else that goes with it. So that's the dichotomy, I guess, of the role. In regards to, I guess, passion, I'm a bit of a rebel without a pause. I am happy to protest and fight for anything and everything.
Without a pause.
Without a pause. But with many, many causes. So even when I was back in uni, I would start all these clubs and protect the animals and stop McDonald's from coming in and fight against KFC and fight against for preservation of trees. So with the bank, we've done a bit of a pivot. Going back to when we started our transformation, our first wave, we wanted to become ABC, Asian Bank of Choice, by 2015. We augmented ourselves to do that. We ended up getting there, then we put our next aspiration was by 2020 BBIW, best bank in the world. That was the next transformation agenda. Now we've hit a point where we did some reflection and our mandate is P3W, best bank for a better world. So we've also gone through a bit of, I guess, realization that there's a fundamental purpose in how banks lubricate the economy and work as a funder, provider, enabler. So that part really holds true to me. So I've been completely invested in that part. So I do a lot of work with what I call now innovation responsibility. Innovating for the future, but making sure it's not at the cost of the future.
I think we're so glad to have someone like you to join us in this fight for a sustainable future. I'm just curious, so how does the bank define what is a better future? I mean, that's kind of your 3.0, right?
Yeah, so we've got, it's a three-pronged strategy. The first one is what we call responsible banking. So how do we make sure our products and our services and our financing, one, it doesn't do any harm, but on the other hand, it does more good. So who do you finance? How do you finance? On the institutional side, on the retail side, financial inclusion, how do you look at the inequality? How do you look at addressing investments into ESG, etc., etc. The second pillar is responsible practice. So that's how we operate as a company, our footprint, our sustainable sourcing, making sure that we are an employer of choice. And the third is impact beyond banking. This is where we look at saying, there are some obvious things every bank will do. What can we do more? Because people, organizations are just a collective of people. So we try and harness our entire workforce to engage with the community. We call it people of purpose. And we have what's called TBS Foundations, where we actively support social enterprises. So we can't do all the good, but if people are doing good, how do you make them do more good? How do you amplify them? So that's our sort of three-pillar strategy.
Okay.
Very happy to hear you say that.
So that's a very important role because money makes the world go round, right? So
Sad but true.
yeah. So I think we want to dig deeper later. So thanks for that. And then we have Quentin.
Thanks, ShuFen, and great segue, I would say. So I'm one of the founding partners of Wavemaker Impact. So Wavemaker Impact is a climate tech venture builder. We're actually the first climate tech venture builder in Southeast Asia. We're one of the very few in the world. And so the core thesis that we have is this idea that if you look at where climate tech capital is going, around 70% of that is going into mobility. If you look at what mobility represents in terms of the climate problem, it's about 12%. Right? And so why does everybody go there? Because you have big examples. You have Elon Musk, who has shown that you can make a shitload of money there, which is great. Right? But so what we then say is, okay, we see do-gooders trying to be entrepreneurs and create successful businesses, and we see entrepreneurs building marketplaces and e-commerce and so on. And so our thesis is, well, what if we build a platform where we can go and get some of these really good entrepreneurs, and we can help them go on the right areas without them having to go and spend time trying to understand climate change, which is a really complex matter, and as a result build companies with them. So that's kind of what we do. We're very new, so we're part of the Wavemaker platform, but we're just doing our second company and so on now. But my personal background is in climate and energy for the past 12 years. So I'm Belgium, engineer, joined a company called Engie, which is one of the leaders in at least at the time, in renewables. Came to Asia, developed a lot of renewables, and what I realized is that I tried to start a hydrogen business for Engie in 2015, when nobody was speaking about it. And what I understood is that innovating infrastructure is really, really hard. Because innovating infrastructure means that you try to impose risks on and some of you may understand this, on project finance structure that is just incapable of carrying that risk. So it just doesn't work. You ask suppliers to provide guarantees, they're unable to provide it. And so what I understood is that hydrogen is something like some of the other decarbon technologies we talk about, is something for the next decade. The reality is we need to halve our emissions in this decade. So what do we do? Well, luckily actually, if you implement at scale everything that exists, energy efficiency, agriculture efficiency that you have in the US, that you bring to Southeast Asia, you deploy solar on every roof. If you do these things, you reduce emissions by 50%. At a profit. There's no cost involved, it's at a profit. The problem you need to solve is adoption problems. If you think, for example, this building, I'm sure this building doesn't have solar on the roof. Has nothing to do with the price of solar. Has something to do with the fact that you have a landlord and a tenant, and they don't necessarily have the same incentives. They don't have the same objectives. So none of them is a bad person. It's just they don't have the right incentives to take action. So how do you create business models to enable these actions? How do you create business models to, make sure that the landlord can actually make more money out of it? Because ultimately, and I don't think it's a bad thing, the world turns around money. So rather than complain about it, how do you use that? How do you use capitalism to, and that's why we're so excited, because venture capital has created such incredible companies, or has facilitated such incredible companies. How do you now do the same in climate? Voilà, that's the story. I'll stop here.
Thank you. So we were just speaking in the room now. Quentin he's always speaking in a climate and related space, and you said this is the kind of the first few times you're kind of engaging the fintech community, right? So
correct.
Yeah. So these are the people to get to know, right? The money makers and the money makes everything spin, right? So this is a nice.
We're still open for fundraise as well.
Okay, so thank you. So thank you for the introduction. So I hope you guys have a better impression or understanding of what they do in their space. So I want to start this. I think for the next hour or 45 minutes or so, we want to talk about the buzzwords that I mentioned, but we want to tap into their experience, their expertise, real experience of what they are going through in their work. And I think before I start, I just want to sort of set the mental picture to contain the discussion. I mean, this is my own naive view. The state of the climate is a collective reality for all businesses, for all individuals. I don't think any business or individuals are exempt from it, unless any one of you has a one-way ticket to Elon Musk's shuttle to Mars. But every one of us are part of this reality. And this in the last 2 years, this talked about net zero by 2050. The latest IPCC report creating some controversy or stir. I understand we not only have to reduce. Quentin is an expert here. We not only have to reduce carbon emissions, we have to try and find ways to get carbon out of our skies. So the challenge is kind of huge, right? So that's why we've got people like Bidyut in the mix. For me, I think when I think about this, when I think about the stakeholders, the government. So in the report, there's a call of IPCC that strong action is required by governments, industries. But if you think about the stakeholders in the system, the government, the industries, the businesses, individuals, all of us are 100% linked and connected in that an action by each party has implications across the chain and reverberations, right? So this is the change that we're kind of seeing happen, and this is linked to the questions that all of us have in our mind. So if these changes are happening, and with external forces like the war, right? The questions that we get, the war that's happening right now, that's causing disruption to the supply chain, that's creating a bit of a mess, and all of us experience it. With drivers, you will notice that your bills have suddenly gone up. Food supply is disrupted. So in a way, we all, if I borrow colloquial language, we all kena, right? When something like this happens, it could be externalities, it could be a change by a party in the system. When a business transforms, when an industry transforms, either because of regulations or carbon tax or whatnot, we're going to feel this reverberations. So we're in it whether we like it or not. So I hope that the discussions for maybe the next half hour, with the experts here, let's try and unravel a bit of the change that's happening, timeline, how is it going to look like for businesses, and how is it going to look like for individuals. The other thing I always think about is the change can come from governments to businesses to consumers and the other way around, right? Producers are producing energy because they are serving some demand of industries, right? Industries are catering to demands of businesses, and businesses are really catering to the changing lifestyles and what consumers want. So it can happen both ways. So this being sort of the picture, the most common question that I saw was in the last 2 years, the two biggest events, the pandemic and of course the war that's happening, a lot of talk. What do you guys see these two events, the impact it has or has not on the ESG agenda? And if so, how do you think it will sort of unfold in the near future? Yeah, maybe I could start with Quentin.
Okay. So I think there's a couple of things, right? So climate change, I think, has if I can put it in this way, the acceptance of climate change as a business risk is something that has started to materialize in 2018. This is a time where you saw the uptake of commitments, where you saw the uptake of companies voicing out their support for it became really significant. So what I think COVID did was it showed us that the world is actually able to take drastic measures in a way that was very unexpected. So today we think it's not. In 2018, how the measures that have happened, we never believed this would have happened. And I think for me, what COVID did is it showed that actually we can take very strong actions. That's what it did for me in climate. What the war now is doing is it has a short-term and a long-term effect. The short-term effect is that actually we're going to be now producing more. You see the US, for example, that is suddenly kind of putting its climate agenda on the side, starting to produce more. But I think that's a short-term effect. The long-term effect of that is that ultimately we've highlighted the issue of being so dependent on fossil fuels, but also on minerals coming from countries that we may not have such good relationships with. So what essentially this will mean is that we were already on a pathway to sort of reduce the effect of globalization, this internalization of countries, and I think what the war is now doing is accelerating that effect. So long term, that's a good thing for climate change, because long term what that means is that if countries start to be more reliant on themselves in order to supply their needs, renewable energy efficiency, different forms of agriculture and so on are all forms that can contribute to that. But the reality is, today Europe buys all this gas from Russia, so they don't have a choice. I mean, they can't just say, oh great, let's not buy gas and start building renewable. I mean, it takes years, right, decades to build that type of infrastructure. So I think what is happening now is that's put in motion. Short-term effect is we all have the impression that it doesn't, that it's negative. Long-term, I think it will be positive.
So are you seeing companies or businesses sort of, maybe I have like a 3-year roadmap to sort of transform the way I rely on the source of energy or the way I do things. Do you see them sort of expediting that to sort of leapfrog, or do you see people still, sort of going around what they're trying to do?
So I'll give you one really interesting example, which is not straightforward. Fertilizers, right? So there's an incredible overuse of fertilizer in agriculture, and it's very simple. In a lot of countries, fertilizers are very cheap. So as a farmer, and Southeast Asia has 100 million smallholder farmers, you just use fertilizers because you think that will increase your yields. If fertilizers have become so much more expensive, which they have now, I mean, you're speaking 3-4 times more expensive, that now allows you to start doing things differently. And so, for example, we are building businesses where we're thinking about, okay, how do we now unlock the value pockets that arise from using less fertilizer for farmers, and as a result, generating more income from them by reducing the amount of fertilizer used. This is the type of things that this creates, that these implicitly very negative macroeconomic events actually, if you leverage them well, allow you to create changes that are ultimately good for the environment. Which, I mean, fertilizer is very high on the list of bad things for the climate. So I think that's a way of how you can think around using that macroeconomic event to do something about it. Energy-wise is much harder, right? Because to develop energy assets, especially here in Southeast Asia, where majority is still very heavy on gas or coal, the transition from that is always going to be slow. So you're talking decades, not 1, 2, 3 years.
Okay. So if we just tie it back to money, right? If we tie it back to money, I'm just looking at Bidyut from an innovation or from, say, a lending perspective or from where the funds are going perspective, what are you seeing?
Actually, I don't disagree, but let me just provide a little bit of a contrarian view. One is, let's say on principle, I say no good has come out of the blending war. It just shouldn't have happened. Nevertheless, secondly is I'm not an expert, I'll give you an opinion. I've got plenty of opinions, and they're all mine. But the entire ESG agenda has been on for years. We all know. We've known for a long time. Even from when the war happened on the supply, etc. And people are scrambling and they're saying short term, I need to make a decision. I'm going to go for what's easiest now because I have an immediate need. And again, that is going to be a crutch of an excuse. Because long term, we've been all thinking long term. And we all are the problem. So I just saw some research before coming in today that, and it was said very proudly, 90% of consumers say they're willing to change to sustainable choices if it's easy enough and doesn't cost more. So everyone says someone else do the bloody work for me because I'm not going to do jack shit, it's someone else's problem. And that's the attitude that's fundamentally the problem here. And if everyone feels that someone else is, and this comes out to even companies as well. But yes, I see more and more that organizations are standing up. So even a lot of people said when they did the highlights of COP26, the majority of the voice, the voice came from everywhere, but the majority of the action that backed up the voice came from private rather than public. You got a lot of, if I go 2017, I think there were 200 people or 200 companies that pledged, now it's 2,000, so it's gone up tenfold. Even if I look at DBS, in 2017, sustainability was 11 pages in our annual report. Now we have a separate booklet of 95 pages that's only on sustainability. So organizations are doing things. Is it enough? Is that long-term thinking? Is that real desire where everyone's saying we're going to solve this? Not completely convinced. So yes, I can see this, the war and COVID, etc. Certain accelerants, but I'm not sure if these are pivotal things that are going to change the trajectory of the world and the decisions we're making and where finance and funding is going.
Yeah.
I'm generally very positive. I'm just playing the skeptic.
It's good to have a contrarian view. I just saw, in trying to prepare for this panel, I just saw a report from World Economic Forum, and one of the points was that there's still a gap, a disconnect between attitude and action that makes an impact. And I don't know if it's good or bad, given two major events that affected us, in such big ways, that it's still the way. Sharon, do you sort of agree, or do you have like a counter contrarian view?
I kind of agree with Quentin's point on, whether is it short-term or long-term view. The long-term view is that yes, they have expedited the two major events last week. Will expedite our move towards or transition towards a more green, sustainable future, right? In terms of the European countries, right, they are most at risk of economic risk because of their dependence on Russia, oil and gas markets. Now kind of expediting their transition to clean energy, and of course now I think Russia is providing 40% of Europe's energy, but that's going to change, right? And I think a lot of you also see a number of European leaders that have put together a comprehensive and strategic plan to kind of transition to clean energy and also commit to reducing the usage of on Russia's oil and gas by 40%. So I do see long term there is a push. People are putting more focus on it, and especially for COVID, right? I think what policymakers and investors have seen was that the pandemic is a wake-up call for us to change our attitude and approach to investing as well. And I think JP Morgan also did a poll, and this over the long run, COVID is going to change the way investors look at, where they are putting their money, and what are the causes, what effects, and causes as well.
Okay. So thank you. I think I want to switch channel a little bit because I have to check box the questions that we've been asked, right, to make sure that it's addressed. So I want to talk about the other buzzword, which is carbon credits, right? And then there were questions about carbon tax. So the question is, how will carbon tax affect the ecosystem in Asia? And on dovetailing onto that, I think the question about carbon credits pushing the green and sustainable agenda, or will it create greenwashing? So on these two things, which are kind of related for me, maybe I'll call on Bidyut if I can.
Sure.
I'm not sure if I can ask you to share a bit about, I know DBS has a stake in Climate Impact X, right? Singapore's global carbon exchange. And if you can sort of give us the opening words.
Sure. So I was involved with CIX. We actually did the original hackathon at our lab, and it started off over there. So, but it was very much when we looked at a number of different concepts, and carbon trading came up. It came up with conditions. So there were a couple of things that were built into the principles of that exchange. Was that one is that we wanted to make sure that organizations that look at carbon credits or carbon offsets look at it after they look at a variety of different things that they could do, abatement, etc. That would, and your carbon credit would be basically, I wouldn't say last resort, but it's down there at the bottom of things that you want to do. The other is then, what is that carbon credit? There is a difference between a high quality carbon credit versus a low quality carbon credit. Is the carbon credit from afforestation or reforestation, or is it from maybe a tech removal, etc.? How do you make sure that organizations understand the components of that carbon credit, what it stands for, and what it's doing? So we looked at those different aspects and saying that we didn't want it just to be a shop where you come in and you can just find a bunch of carbon credits and away you go. We wanted it to stand for making the world a better place. So you look at the education aspect of it, you look at we created an advisory council, so from an awareness aspect of it, the community engagement aspect of it, and then the actual product. So that's how we sort of staged it. And but again, yes, as an organization, we were like, okay, you can see the trend on carbon credits going upwards. You can see carbon tax coming in. It is a way to create liquidity, and that liquidity, if used well, can go back into meaningful projects. So where you're saying we're looking at money for these infrastructure projects that might be a little questionable, there is a way to channel the funding round. So those are the different aspects we sort of traveled with, and what eventuated was a lot of love and care to make sure that it actually stood for more than just being a marketplace of carbon credits, because we didn't want to fall into that, okay, everyone's just buying carbon credit, I pay for my sins, and away you go. And all the greenwashing aspects that come with it.
Yeah, which is actually my next question from what I read. And I also just downloaded an app, and I realized that actually I was telling Quentin that you can have an app that actually tracks your individual carbon footprint, right? Your diet, your transport, and all that. And in some of the apps, I saw that I can sort of offset my carbon by, putting money in forestry project. And it just makes me wonder, and it's related to the question as well. So am I paying off? I can continue my lifestyle, just sort of, how do you think?
Okay, so let me flip it in another way, and I'm going to get you guys involved. Let me paint a scenario to you, because this happened to me yesterday. So, one is, and this is tangent to the question, Financial Times has come up with this online game that you can play. It's really cool. They've gamified the process of you making decisions on how to hit 1.5, because we're currently on a trajectory of 2.4. And you can make these decisions, and it's a super cool game. So we all competed internally on our decisions. Some of the choices were obvious, painful, but obvious. So So now let me come to a scenario. Grab. I'm sure you guys all use Grab. Grab have come up with a new feature where you can choose a green car. So the price currently is the same. You can get a normal car or you can get a green car. But everyone easy to go for the green car. Now I put the scenario that it's a little bit of rain. The green cars, the less green cars on the road. So you're going to have to wait 10 minutes more. What do people do? They just don't want to just grab car. So it's not that we don't have an opportunity to do the right thing. It's not that you need an app to tell you your carbon footprint is high to make you do something. Just I spoke in another event and I said the ability now to do good with technology, to feed a child somewhere across the world, to help someone in an area, or to educate a girl, whatever it might be, it's so easy than ever before. But funds that have gone into it, not that it has increased as much as the accessibility has increased. So fundamentally, I'm a little jaded by everyone, but more from an intent that I think the answers are a little more obvious than we paint them to be. It's the action that we don't seem to follow through somehow.
Yeah, so I think you nailed it, because I mean this is related to one of the questions I see. How will companies seek to enhance sustainability while maintaining profitability? If I roll out a product that is green, if I have to deal with an increased price, then who's going to take the higher price, right? So that could be the problem, and we were talking about it yesterday, that about this how do you see sustainability for companies? I wonder if Sharon or Quentin, you want to have anything to add based on, especially for STACS, right? You're helping a lot of businesses with their data disclosures and all that.
I think for carbon credits is important. I mean, what STACS is doing is actually looking at the use of technology to do the perpetual monitoring of the commitments for carbon credits, right? And Bidyut on the example of Grab, I think there's also an option where you pay 10 cents more to offset, but where does this money go to? How is it being used towards sustainability? We do not know, right? So that's where we kind of look at using technology to track all this data. And we are working with some corporates to do this. I think it's also to help corporates to monitor, to see whether, to track their performance as well, to track their ongoing performance and to see whether they are meeting their targets. And also, what we have built, ESGpedia, is actually I mentioned like Wikipedia. Yes, it's called ESGpedia. I love that name. Yes, and
Trademark.
it is. Yeah, and any famous person will have a page on Wikipedia, right? So what we are envisioning is the corporate will have their profile on ESGpedia, and all their efforts, their green efforts, their ESG scoring, CDP score, and their self-disclosure score will be there, right? Their certificates, for their individual assets, whether it's for their buildings, for their vehicles, all this data will be there. So, and even for carbon credits as well. So these are what we are doing, and we're working with all the different stakeholders in the industry. And it is not an easy task, working with so many different stakeholders. And our role is to bring everybody within the industry and putting the data on this platform.
Yeah. So I think at a minimal level, awareness.
Yes.
Right, awareness, where before even sort of deciding whether the action makes an impact. So to this, I want to circle.
Sorry.
You looking at me like
I
there's
want to
something
act
to
on
say.
3 things.
I'm interested to hear what you say, because I think your model directly addresses that.
So I want to say 3 things, and I might forget halfway, but I'll try. So the first thing is on what you said around demand for sustainability. I think people don't buy sustainability. It's very simple. People buy a better iPhone, a better car, a nicer suit, and So I think the world of sustainability for the past 12 years that I've been in there, we try to sell sustainability, and I don't think that's the answer. What we need to do is to sell better products. So I was the lucky driver of an electric car until last year, and I briefly rechanged from petrol, and I'll rechange to electric. I love the electric much more. It's a much better car. It drives better. And I think, for example, that is why Tesla was so successful, because it made a better product. So I think what we try to do, for example, at Wavemaker Impact is really to think all the time around solving that business problem or that emotional problem, create something that is better than what is the existing version and make that a lower carbon version. Make the farmer use less fertilizer, up their profit by 20%, and as a result reduce their emissions. So that's kind of the first thing, because I personally don't buy the 10-cent edition on so I don't think people do that. So that's the first thing I wanted to share. The second is on the carbon tax. So carbon tax will most likely happen, I guess, I don't know, that's what I think. But I think it's a very painful, for society it's really, really painful, because ultimately it is everybody who's penalized for that. Everybody who's the Grab driver who's driving the car, the person who's it's most likely the lower class of society that will be most painfully impacted by that. So I think there's a real political, societal concern about doing that. There's a real barrier to adoption for a politician to impose a carbon tax that is going to impact everyone. So I still think ultimately that is what we will need to make this happen. But I don't think it's an easy thing to implement. And that's why I like carbon credits so much. Because what happens is that voluntary carbon markets, you get corporates that have the ability to do it, to start by essentially creating that adoption, that demand for it. And I think there is a risk of greenwashing. But what is interesting is that you mentioned it's an element of liquidity. So reducing carbon emission involves doing stuff on the ground. It's not just software, right? You need to build other things. You need to put machines. You need to change certain practices. You need to do stuff that is physical. And if the only value that can unlock is local value by installing a solar panel somewhere and selling the electricity more expensively, to name a very gross example of that, but what carbon credits allow you to do is to unlock carbon saving somewhere where it's low-hanging fruit and have that financed by somebody else. So in the short term, it means that the rich person is able to kind of continue to emit. But if you kind of now put this forward, this year you can get away with that, but next year you get more pressure, so you need to start to physically reduce more emissions as a carbon credit buyer, and so on and so on and so on. So if we can reduce 50% of our emissions, say, with carbon credits, still by having the richer companies emit more, but if ultimately you reduce emissions of the world by 50%, that's a really good thing. And then let's solve the problem that now we need to reduce those difficult to abate emissions from I call it the rich, but it can be airplanes, it can be the difficult to abate sectors. So I'm very, very bullish on it. I think there is of course a big risk of abuse and misuse and so on, but that's okay. We can take that with it and kind of will deal with it along the way.
Well, I'm not a tax or policy expert, but we got a header on GST faster than carbon tax. So I think they are mechanisms, not that I'm proponent for carbon tax, but there are mechanisms around it, and I do know that there is pain, but if this entire bloody planet perishes, we don't have another one.
Yeah.
So if we all aren't willing to make that hard decision, hard choice, and face up to the problem that we've caused, then who else will?
So this panel is optimistic about carbon credits, I suppose. And I think, Quentin, based on what you say, it sounds like it's not a tech problem. It's not a money problem, because the money will go where it makes money. It seems to be a business sort of perspective and business issue. Would you think?
I'm sure there's better experts here, but I think at least there's a couple of problems I'm aware of. Is that one, there's this. We have a couple of businesses that try to certify themselves. The process to get there is expensive, it's tedious, it's difficult. You need to have big volumes. So there's this idea, and I think there's one person in the room that is working on that. This idea of how do you make the accessibility of generating carbon credits much easier. I think there's a whole question around the transparency of it and the whole topic around greenwashing that we talked about. But ultimately, none of these are science problems, right? They're all business problems. How do you make processes more efficient? How do you create more transparency? So I think for me the bigger risks I see today, the reason why we might be prudent with it is the regulatory risk with it. You know, we create, for example, a business that generates lots of carbon credits in Indonesia, and then suddenly Indonesia decides to keep all carbon credits in the country. That is the bigger risk, and that's in all countries.
I mean, I think even like you met Helga, but from our sustainability officer, I mean, he talks a lot about it. It's very much aligned that there is actually a product with purpose, and sustainability and having a business case around it, it's viable. It doesn't always have to be that someone's going to pay the price. You get more inventive in how you skin, what's in the cat, how you skin the orange. I think there is a way to get around that.
Okay. So I think we had a pretty good discussion about that. I just want to make sure there's time to get to the other topic and also for the audience to ask questions. So I want to switch again so the purpose of the next 10 minutes, hopefully we can give blockchain a good name again when we look at it through ESG lens, right? So the question was, blockchain and energy consumption, does blockchain qualify as a sustainability driver? You know, all the talk about mining and staking, how much energy consumes. How can blockchain drive more sustainable businesses by empowering transparency? I think to Sharon's point, will decentralization and blockchain technology actually consume more energy? I think that relates to the question one. And are there any challenges if you look ahead with blockchain moving forward to accelerate the ESG agenda? Maybe we can have Sharon too.
So I think, okay, we all know that Bitcoin mining is energy intensive, but enterprise blockchain like what STACS is using, you know, there's no mining involved, right? And what we've built, the ESGpedia, is actually on the blockchain or DLT, distributed ledger technology. And the reason that we have built it on the blockchain was firstly ease of access, right? Because the blockchain allows different jurisdictions to be able to access, everyone to be able to access the data easily. Secondly, is also the immutability, which allows for transparency. So you're able to know that there's no double spending as well. And thirdly is smart contracts. We are able to write smart contracts on the blockchain, and this allow for the tracking of monitoring of whether of your sustainability KPIs, or whether is it for the retirement of carbon credits as well. So the ability to use smart contracts on the blockchain, is one of the benefits of why we have put it on the blockchain.
Anything to add from Bidyut or Quentin?
I think one is, if you look at cryptography, I went and tried to look at how they create the blockchain keys. It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating how they have the ability to convert and reverse engineer everything into an 8-string or 26-string bit. So I get the whole proof of work. Everyone says yes, bad, fair enough. Proof of stake, good. Because they are more pros than cons. I think with every technology, there is going to be an application. I find that often a lot of people will run towards blockchain as a default. And yes, you can go to a lot of conferences and everyone's got a blockchain in their pocket. And then investors will throw money at it simply because they are using the blockchain when, quite frankly, it's fishing with a shotgun. So I think the industry is going to normalize itself. There are some brilliant things that you can do if you can set it up right. So from that perspective, pro what the tech's opportunity is, applied in the right place. But yes, if you look at Bitcoin mining or anything that works on the consensus model that's extremely intensive, I think it's an obvious answer.
So I know very little about blockchain, so I will not say anything about that.
We've got some people.
We'll do that later. But I'm more from the application point of view. So the way we think, we like to solve big problems in climate. And what's interesting is that going back to the physical nature of solving the climate problem, a lot of the physical industry is very outdated. I mean, we do solar development, energy efficiency development, agricultural efficiency. So to the extent that blockchain can become a means of making that more efficient, I think it's great. I think it's the exact tool we should apply. But I guess the way we will look at it is more from this is a problem we want to solve, this is how much savings in carbon and how much dollar this can create. What's the right platform to do this? And if it's blockchain, then we'll be the first to jump on it. But I guess to your point as well is how do you turn that around and you use it for to solve a problem rather than as an application first.
But it's interesting. So we also went and we tokenized. A lot of people are using bonds to tokenize, and they're tokenizing an asset. Assets that used to be at a ticket price of 150,000. Sorry, 150,000. That means only a few people can access it. They've been able to tokenize it down to fractions of 1,500. That means more people can invest, which is great. But I often scratch my head saying, what the hell was the problem for you not to be able to do that? Because it's all just a digital product that you can fragment. So it's just a really interesting space. I'm completely fascinated by it. Very pro. I love things that are ambiguous and unknown, and I think it's a little ambiguous and unknown right now.
Absolutely. I'm just curious, so I'm going to just turn the table to the audience because you guys are experts as well, right? I mean, this is your space. So optimistic about blockchain as a sustainability driver. I don't know if any of what you've heard today has influenced you. If you're optimistic from what you know, that blockchain is a driver. Okay, half. Does it mean the other half is not? Or you're kind of on the fence? On the fence? Pessimistic. Oh, interesting poll. Okay, thank you for that. So, okay, I'm just.
Why? Do you want some fun too?
Oh yeah, okay. Anybody want to share? Like maybe this gentleman.
Did you want to go at the?
I didn't really want to say anything about it, but it's probably just because we've all had a history, we all missed out, or we invested early in Bitcoin. No, but really, I totally agree with you. It's the idea that the blockchain would solve this, it's ridiculous. We have to solve it in a deeper level, absolutely. So that's all I'm saying. Thanks.
I think we should see blockchain as a technology. View it as blockchain or the distributed ledger technology has another form of your IT system. It's totally separate from cryptocurrency. Blockchain is the technology that, yes, when it started, it was a technology behind Bitcoin, but we're using it for other use cases, other areas. Yeah.
I've seen some great examples where if you talk about a distributed ledger and you have now created nodes and multiple people can access the same technology, and it's so cool that you can see in one corner of the world someone's done an innovation around, let's say, KYC, and it can immediately transfer to the entire network globally. So from that perspective, I think there's a lot of innovation that can be unlocked with the right safeguards, etc. But yeah, the deeper questions of data, privacy, sovereignty, and all the other wonderful things that go with it, those all still need to get figured out. For me, I struggle when people create blockchain solutions and just stick it inside one organization and then it's just an Excel spreadsheet.
So I guess you have different people from different sectors and different industries to try and figure this out. Before, I want to give time to the audience to ask questions before I sort of do the last part with the panel. So I wonder if you guys have any questions you want to ask any of the panelists.
Easy multiple choice.
Awesome. Oh, that's good. No worries.
You can't escape.
No, yeah.
Hi guys, good here. I guess sustainability, the question that I have, maybe not so much of technology, but really again bring us back to the decisions. You see, because at the end of the day, I personally keep to recognize that sustainability comes at a cost. It will come at a cost. I can't envision it to be free. At the end of the day, whether you want companies to do reporting, you want new solutions, and the company has to buy them. It comes to us paying 10 cents for plastic bags in NTUC, right, or any grocery store for that matter. And I confess half the time I still buy the bag because I need to line my trash bin. I know it's not the right answer, but probably I'm still doing that at the moment. How are we able to convince consumers as well as enterprise, or even at the government level, that we all have to chip in? And that's exactly to all the conversation you guys had earlier, whether that 10 cents to reforestation or the grab car or 10 minutes. And I'm struggling with that because I have 2 boys and they all love sugar drinks. We still go to 7-Eleven, we still buy bottled waters. It still occurs to me that we are still buying, after we consume, we throw the bottle away. And to your point earlier, that mobility is only 30%, but sustainable funding goes there. But how about the bottling? The day would it come, how many of us here actually carry our own water bottle? I just want to do a quick poll. Yeah, I saw one, sure. I don't. I'm more of us who don't. But yet, is there any dispenser? So I think to this interesting panel here today, I'm just really curious from your experience, from your own personal opinion as well. How do we have that dilemma? How do we really, can we come to terms with that? And is it within our lifetime that probably we will see something like that?
Can I maybe go first? Cool. So I disagree actually with the point that sustainability needs to cost money. So I think it's more of a timing question. So if you take, let's take an example, solar. Look at solar 20 years ago. Look at solar 15 years ago when I started in energy. I mean, people were joking about it. This was a joke. Like, this will never happen. It's so expensive. It is unscalable. It is ridiculous. And today it's the cheapest form of electricity. That's it, right? It's the cheapest form of electricity. And sure, there's other problems, right? Because now solar is only part of the time there, but wind is the same thing. EVs 15 years ago were a joke because they were too expensive. Today, I mean, you can buy a Tesla or a BMW 3 here. It's kind of the same price. You're in the same ballpark. So I think what we need to differentiate is the alternative to what we have today might be more expensive today because it's kind of at hobby scale. But if you bring it to industrial scale, what does that cost curve look like? And I think if anything that we've learned over the past probably 2 decades around technology is that these cost curve go down as you increase use of it. So the way I like to think about it is, where we focus is, what are the low-hanging fruits where we can use what already exists in terms of technology that are already at these points that make sense. And again, right, I think I've named all the pillars. Across all pillars you can do this. And you unlock efficiency gains from that in order to increase the adoption. So, I mean, very concrete examples. For example, on if you look at electricity today, even in Singapore, right? If you have a building and you put solar on your roof, you're going to have a discount compared to your electricity bill against what you buy from the grid. If you look at the total cost of ownership on an electric car, my electric car, which was a Hyundai Kona, was cheaper to run. Total cost of life, total life cost, compared to a petrol equivalent, which includes insurance, which includes the purchase of the car and the actual fuel charging. The example I was mentioning earlier around agriculture, right? We 100 million farmers in Southeast Asia. We're targeting different segments of them where we either increase the efficiency on using less fish meal, using solar pumps instead of diesel pumps for irrigation, etc., etc. So I think all these opportunities are there, but it's about unlocking the right ones. What I think, for example, does not make sense today is hydrogen airplanes, right? It doesn't mean we shouldn't be working on it, but it doesn't make sense today. But as you get people working on it, over time, at some point, it will become cheap. Maybe I'll just add one more example because I thought it's been a marking point for me in my life. So in 2016, with LNG, we went to one of our first LNG terminals in France, Fos-Tonquin. And we went there with I think we were 100 people there, trying to answer the question. This was one of the first LNG terminals. LNG is natural gas that you bring on boats in Europe. And we asked the question, how can we convert this to hydrogen? Because ultimately we would like Europe's energy supply to be hydrogen-based. And you know, for 3 days we were debating. There were politicians, there were engineers, there were scientists, and we were debating and calculating the economics of all of that. And you know, you had the people saying, "Oh, this is nonsense. You know, it's 4 times more expensive. We'll never get there. It's never gonna happen." So at the end, you had a really old guy. I think he was about 80 years old, who stood up, and he said, "I participated exactly 60 years ago in the same discussion around LNG." Right? Because NG was actually one of the first to operate an LNG vessel. And so this guy was part of that same conversation 60 years earlier. And was in and so his point was, we had exactly the same arguments at the time. We were saying it's too expensive, it's nonsense, you know, coal is so cheap, we should only do that, why would we import LNG, it doesn't make sense, and so on. So it's just about walking down those curves and using what makes sense as it becomes ready and scaling it up. Does that make sense?
Does it mean we have to have this panel 10 years later together?
It's going to happen if he continues.
Woman has to be
We'll
here,
snapshot this and then we'll make sure that we remind ourselves for next 10 years.
But for me, for me that's a classic point. I mean, if you look at governments, you look at organizations, you look at communities, associations, right down to families and people. It's just people. At the end of the day, we say people, like you look at all our role models, Musk and Branson and Steve Jobs and Mahatma Gandhi and Taylor. It's all people that have changed the world. It's all the decisions that they have made. You look at when you mentioned the pandemic made us all change our life by circumstance. The problem is we all feel sustainability is a choice and it should be regarded as a circumstance. And we all make individual decisions that are counter. So I switched from the disposable, you know, the regular blades to a single blade old school razor. So, I cut my face all the time, so I bleed for the planet every day. But it's a choice I made saying I'm going to use that single blade rather than now you have the Gillette 5 blades and all the other wonderful tech and technology and plastics that they've molded around it. So it's the same. And from that side, it comes down to all the decisions that we make, because we will make decisions as startups, as companies, as government officials that are going to make the difference. And if it's not us, then I don't know. So Ruben, I'm going to hold you accountable to that plastic shit. I'm disgusted. I'm going to come and badger you
I'll buy the
every
right one,
time
I'll buy
I
the right
see
ones.
you.
So Quentin, on that, I have a question. So it's changing, right? It's walking down that curve. Do you see in the coming 1 to 2 years, and that's the question on every business mind, how fast is it going to be the change that I have to prepare for? Is it going to get exponentially fast, or is it going to, are we still, at the latter part of the curve, or it's just...
So we're not on the right track, if that's the question, right? So we are, if you kind of look at the overshoot, we've already overshot, and we're continuing to overshoot, right? So we're not yet decreasing our emissions and so on. So I'm super optimistic. I think we're gonna get there. It's all gonna be okay, but I think the journey is gonna get harder than it is already today. So the way I like to think about this evolution is that from the moment that it becomes a business problem, people start caring about it, and I think we're starting to get there. So asset at risk based on climate risk becomes a real thing. China Water Risk has really interesting analysis on that, and so you start to see, for example, today if I want to buy a house, I'm going to be thinking whether I really want to buy my house at a coast in front of the sea or somewhere else. And I think that inherent risk starts to be, I don't know if it starts to be priced yet in assets, but it starts to come. Things like Larry Fink making a point about driving forward, I would say, an ESG mindset within the portfolio. You see the same thing starting to happen here in Singapore, right, with Temasek, which is starting to impose a certain, and I'll be light on the words, but start to impose a certain chip. So I think what will happen is that as that adoption becomes more and more natural, that's always going to start increasing on its own. Which is why, to come back to the carbon credits question, I think it's okay that today people buy carbon credits, they offset their emissions, because ultimately as we progress and we start to decrease our emissions, the pressure will increase and increase and increase, and ultimately you'll then have to kind of abate your harm too. So I don't want to put a timeline on it, but I think at some point we're gonna go like this, and you'll be a bad guy. You'll be out of business.
For me, I think of there's no right way. We don't know what the right way is, but for me, it's you just got to try everything. And it's whether it's the carbon tax, whether it's carbon credits, whether it's carbon capture, whatever it might be. No more fertilizers, crap putting 10 cents extra, whatever it is. I think we just got to try many different things. And that's for me, the sentiment. So you talked the first question about COVID. That sentiment is the only one thing that I see has changed. The willingness or the understanding that we can change. I think those are things that I take as big positives. And the more we try.
Can I add one more thing? So we recently did a mapping on how much of GDP is already committed to net zero targets at some point. Right? There's different numbers. It's about 85%. So for me, the really interesting question is, you now have 85% of the world's money that has said we need to be at zero somewhere, and nobody has a clue on how to do it. So this is an incredible opportunity to create all those service providers. And the way they will compete is by, do you make me pay for that decarbonization, or do you offer it to me either at a cost or at a profit, at a low cost or at a profit, because you're able to unlock some efficiency somewhere and as a result. And I think that's why I get so excited about this, and that's why I'm optimistic about the fact that we will solve this, because as soon as it becomes an upside opportunity, which it is becoming, it's the gold rush, it's Bitcoin, it's all those things.
So you really want to get ahead, right? Not when it's happening. You really want to be ahead and do that change. So thank you. I'm just conscious of the time. I want to give a little bit of time to ask if you guys have any questions for the panelists before I just close this.